China's one-child policy. Background. It was initiated in the late 1970s and early 1980s by the central government of China. Its purpose was to reduce the growth rate of China's population that by the 1970s was reaching almost 1 billion. A voluntary program came first in 1978 that encouraged families to have no more than 2 children. But in the 1980s, the central government wanted to standardize the one-child policy across the entire nation. Details. There were some exceptions. If a firstborn child was handicapped or parents were a part of an ethnic minority group, they were allowed to have more than 1 child. Urban families were more willing to comply with the policy. Families in rural areas, agrarian extended families, resisted the one-child policy because they needed children for work. Enforcement was stricter in cities and more lenient in the countryside. They made contraceptive methods easily available, offered financial incentives, and employment opportunities for following the one-child policy. Experiences. They imposed sanctions against violators of the policy. At times, they invoked forced abortions. There was 336 million abortions in total and 196 million sterilizations in total. A woman from Bobai County in Guangxi Province reported that officials took her from her home, kicked her in the belly, and forced her to go to the hospital where her fetus was aborted and she was sterilized. Another woman reported she was forced to have an abortion when 8 months pregnant. He was still alive after the nurse pulled him out from me. He was a tough little creature. He clutched the nurse's sleeve and wouldn't let go. She had to peel his fingers off her one by one before she could drop him into the bin, the woman told Jian. Here are some graphs that show that the younger population is decreasing and there is a larger population of elderly people, and the population overall has dropped since the one-child policy was put into place. Consequences. There were extreme protests. People torched government buildings. The sex ratio was skewed towards males 3 to 4% because male children were preferred, especially in rural areas. Many female babies were abandoned or infanticide. This led to many Chinese girls being adopted by families in the US and other countries. The growing population of elderly people meant there were fewer children to support the elderlies. Births were often hidden from authorities, so these children had trouble finding education and employment. The program ended in 2016, and Chinese families are now allowed to have 2 children. Some questions to consider. Was the one-child policy needed? How else could they have worked on their population crisis? At what point is this policy restricting freedoms? How would the United States react if a policy like this was implemented? How would you enforce a policy like this?